Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the first ever episode of Cold Brew Wrestling Podcast, your number one wrestling podcast in the world. Just kidding, that's something Logan Paul would say. We are not the number one wrestling podcast, but it does make me wonder, now that Logan Paul is signed with WWE, does that mean his podcast is now officially a wrestling podcast because he interviews wrestlers? That is questions that run through my mind, but I doubt that is actually the real deals. Yes, Cold Brew Wrestling Podcast. Don't ask me why I named the podcast the way it is. I was just trying to make up random names like Good Morning Wrestling and stuff like that, only for me to Google search it and all sorts of names are taken, or at least used. Some names have been used and then have not been used since like 2017, but it's just, it feels dirty to take the name anyways. So, Cold Brew Wrestling. Why not? This is going to be some cold takes, maybe some warm takes, who knows. Where do we get started? Let me talk about myself a little bit. I have been on YouTube since 2008. I've been creating a lot of content over the years, and lately, the past couple of years especially, I feel like my content has been getting better and better. Ever since COVID happened, one of my videos called 10 Hours of Nothing had skyrocketed into a meme and now gets a lot of views every month, which is interesting. Who knew a video that is literally a blank screen would get me that far? How did I get into wrestling? Well, oddly enough, it was back in 2008 as well. That is when I first started watching wrestling. Now, a lot of people, when they get into wrestling, they get into wrestling by WWE. Now, granted, that was around my life, but I actually started wrestling with TNA wrestling back in 2008, where you got the Sting, you got AJ Styles, you got Samoa Joe, you got Christopher Daniels, you got all sorts of top talent, just absolutely killing the business. And it seemed at that time the production, the quality was so great, so underrated for it being in 2008. That is almost, it is 14 years ago actually, because we're in the year of 2022. It's so fascinating how much time flies, but the quality of it, the HD, everything, when you look back at 2008, not just TNA, but WWE as well, it's like, man, the quality of these matches, the quality of the video, the quality of the tech, it's not all that bad. So it baffles me how time goes by that quickly, but we're all still so young, so use up your time as much as you can and enjoy life the way it's meant to be. Oh man, what are we going to get ourselves into? So I wanted to talk about what happened at the latest GCW homecoming event where Jon Moxley went up against Effy. And there's a lot of backlash going on the social medias like Twitter and Facebook and all that. And a lot of people disapprove Jon Moxley wrestling someone like Effy, who is more expressive of who he is out there in the wrestling world. For those of you who don't know, he is, in support of the LGBTQ. He's in support of a lot of things out there. And he is an expressive character, and he's a good wrestler. He is a very good wrestler. And when it comes to GCW events, I expect a lot of people to understand that GCW is not your typical wrestling show. This is your rated R wrestling show. Like, so there might be some tiers that go above what ECW did. And it is quite interesting because you're not going to take a kid to that wrestling event. Or at least a person who watched one GCW show would understand, yeah, this is definitely not a kid's show. We're not going to take any kids over there. So you would expect to have a standard of what GCW would premiere. So there was a spot where Jon Moxley was choking out Effy in the middle of the ring. And Effy Daddy liked it. He liked it a little too much. So he put his hand down his pants. And that's where a lot of the backlash comes from, is that people don't like a man touching himself in the middle of the ring in a public forum. Now, you kind of have to put the standards somewhere along the line when it comes to this kind of stuff. You are a GCW show, so things are going to get very rated R very quickly. And when you go to another show, like let's just say you go to a random indie show that you've never heard of, it's small, and you're not really expecting stuff other than wrestling and a couple of promos on the mic. That's what you can expect. If that happened there, if something like that, if Effie did something like that at a random indie show, okay, I would understand. A lot more people would be upset about that because you would actually have kids there. You would have your family there. You would probably bring your friends there. You would be there just to watch wrestling, drink a little beer, and have a good time. And if something like that would happen, yeah, I don't think you would have the best reaction. But when you're at a GCW show and you're drinking a beer, you're having a fun time, you can expect what to happen at a GCW show. And so Effie doing that is a little surprising to some, but not so surprising to me. I don't know. It's just interesting how people think. Now, of course, this gets posted on the internet. Everyone's on the internet, so everyone's going to have an opinion on it. Everyone's going to have a take on it. And yeah, maybe minors should not be looking at that. Now, you have forums like Twitter, you have Reddit, you have all sorts of different medias where a bunch of like middle high schoolers are on because their parents aren't really watching over what they're doing. And so, of course, a lot of these kids are going to lie about their age. They're going to create a profile. They're going to be like, oh, yeah, I'm definitely over 18. They're going to make profiles. They're going to see this kind of stuff. And next thing you know, you got some problems on your hands. So it's interesting. Where do I draw a line? Of course, maybe it should not have been done. I'm not too sure. Some people don't have a problem with it. There's a lot of people that are defending Jon Moxley. Like, there was some actual cool bits where Jon Moxley was just smoking a cigarette while just repeatedly blowing elbows to Effie's head. That was a pretty cool scene. You got a wrestling ring, a little bit of a dark background, somewhat ECW feel like, but it's a GCW, so GCW will always have their crowds. And, man, that is a photographic picture right there. That is a scene. You don't often see that in modern wrestling. You don't often see a wrestler smoking a cigarette as much. You don't see more of like a hard cutting style wrestler, or at least it's not more mainstream. I'm sure it happens at random shows or smaller venues, but of course it's not going to get the mainstream attention because no one knows who this person is. No one knows that, blah, blah, blah. But when you got someone like Jon Moxley, who was top tier in WWE, who was top tier everywhere he went to, man, that is just a cool sight to see. Man. I didn't really watch the entire GCW show, however. It's just not my cup of tea, I guess. I mean, I'll watch it here and there if I have nothing better to do. The prime wrestling shows that I do like to watch are AEW. That's one of the first wrestling shows that come to mind when it comes to wrestling. Just to me, ever since they started in 2019, that was a page turner in wrestling, and that was just phenomenal. And then COVID happened, and they did a lot of shows at dailies, and I've personally attended a lot of these shows throughout the COVID era. I was there for Brody Lee's last match, the dog collar match against Cody Rhodes for the TNT Championship, in which Cody had won that one. You could hear those chains anywhere near that area. Those chains echoed. It had echoed across the arena. Well, the, what is it, auditorium? I don't know what's the proper term for dailies, but you could hear it across the venue. It didn't matter what seat you were. I think I was in the second floor, and the front row of the second floor. So I had pretty good seats. I had a view of everything, and that was a lot of my view. I didn't. And what was great about the COVID era, as much as I hate to say it, as much as a terrible time COVID was, at any time I went to that show, no one was near me, and it was so great because I could stretch, I could flex, I could do whatever. If I needed to put food next to me, I could do that. I didn't have to worry about a single person being next to me. If I wanted to bring a friend, I could just bring a friend. It was so great. Oh, I loved it. Just a couple of hours, sitting back, relaxing, getting a little expensive snacks because, of course, no matter what venue you go to, they're always going to overprice the food. So at that time in 2020, because it's Daly's Place, they amphitheater, not auditorium, amphitheater. Because it was at a Daly's Place amphitheater, they actually had their own little Daly's Place concession, and it was kind of like walking into the gas station, but a little bit smaller. And they did have some of the snacks that they would carry at the station, like a pack of gummy worms, soda, popcorn, boiled peanuts, whatever you need. And a lot of times I'll just grab a soda or a beer, water, and then maybe I'll grab a snack. Maybe I'll grab gummy worms. Maybe I'll grab a little popcorn. Maybe just one item, though. I would never overdo it when I go to an event. I would just grab one drink, one food. That, I think, would be enough for an event, just for sitting down a couple hours, just munching, snacking. Because I would like to have my meals before, maybe make something at home or pick up something cheap, so that way you're not overpaying for something ridiculous. But at that time, they didn't really have anything like proper to eat. They didn't actually have like subs or burgers or whatever. They kind of just had snacky stuff. Eventually, over time in 2021, they would gradually convert to opening more concessions, and then they would have more variety. And that would be the time where they started bringing in more people to the audience. And but in 2020, oh my goodness, I didn't mind wearing a mask at all. And it's interesting, in the area of Jacksonville, you have like split opinions around here. So you got people who hate the masks. You can sometimes hear people complaining. You can sometimes hear people that don't care about it. They just deal with it. And I have had experiences where, like, if you're not wearing a mask, these security guards will really take you out of there. They will call you out. They will put you outside. They'll kick you out and call it a day. If you were not wearing your mask at that time, that is how the rules played. But that was also a time when things were very uncertain. So they were testing the waters. They're testing the audience. They're testing, let's see how many people we can bring in. Let's see how safe this can be. Let's see what we can do. Because a live audience really did matter comparing to a non-live audience. And as I think AEW is the first company to bring in a live audience for national television before WWE did it. And, AEW was the first to have, like, wrestlers go around the ring and chant. And I hated it, but I didn't hate it. I enjoyed people putting their effort, but I hated how staged it was. Because whenever there's a heel in the middle of that ring and they were cutting a fabulous promo and it made you want to cheer, those people kept booing anyways. And it's like, it's kind of ruining it, because you want to cheer for a heel that's cutting a quality grade A promo. You kind of just want to cheer. And it sucks. Sometimes that would happen during matches. People will be chanting for the wrong people. I understand it, though, but luckily that was short-lived. Luckily we got a little bit of an audience to more so shout what they wanted to shout, rather than have the wrestlers around the ring just shouting whatever. And a lot of times on quieter nights, the wrestlers around the ring did help when there was a live audience, and a live audience was dull, like didn't say a thing. A lot of times the wrestlers around would start to clapping, they would start to chant, it would be whatever. Boy, but do I miss having empty seats next to me. Do I miss it? Absolutely. Because I've gone to the recent show of AEW Fight for the Fallen. Oh no, it was Fighter Fest. It was Fighter Fest Night 1, not Fight for the Fallen. Even though I had gone to a Fight for a Fallen in 2019 when that was a pay-per-view, way back before they turned it into a Dynamite exclusive. I went to that one as well. I went to so many wrestling events. So what I started to do, actually, I started putting a notebook. If I could find it. I put it down somewhere underneath my desk. But that just shows you how much I care about it, huh? But, yeah, I started this wrestling note. Oh, here it is. If I can grab it. There we go. Okay. So I started this wrestling notebook. And it's got a lot of the wrestling events that I've attended. I haven't completed it just yet, but I've been going to a lot of these events since 2010. I first started going to my first event was in November 23rd, 2010. It was in Jacksonville. It was at the Veterans Memorial Arena, and it was a SmackDown. Oh man. It also premiered NXT before it became the NXT that we love and know today in Orlando. And we also had a short showing of Superstars where Kurt Hawkins defeated Trent. Man. And Trent, it's phenomenal to see him from point A to point B to where he is now. Point A from here, Trent, a young superstar, has a lot of potential. It's phenomenal to see the kind of superstar he's become now. It's a little sad that he is not a tag team champion because he is championship material, best friends with Orange Cassidy. That is just spewing out gold, in my opinion. And they're good wrestlers. They don't miss. And it's just surprising to see they haven't won the tag team championships for how long they've spent in AEW. They've been there since day one. And, oh boy, the tough thing is, when AEW first started, there's a lot of young talent there, a lot of promising talent, and it's like, man, I would just love to see championship golds on everyone, but of course that can't happen. Boy, and you would think something like that would happen, but AEW, they don't toss around gold like a joint in a club or anything. They take their pretty time, and it is great, the storytelling that they've been able to put out there. Oh man, so how far have I gotten into this notebook? I have stopped on the Jericho cruise. I put down night 1 of the triple whammy Jericho cruise that I put on here, but I've been to so many wrestling events, and I'm not finished with this. I plan on filling this notebook out. Of course, the amount of wrestling events that I went to, it's not going to completely fill this notebook, but I do hope in life I will be able to just write it all down, write all my events that I've attended to. Some events I've been able to get front row tickets, some events I've been sitting in the back, like Fighter Fest. I was a little bit in back, but it wasn't that bad because John Moxley had went up to my section, and it was pretty cool. But that's about that for the notebook. Put that back down below where it belongs. Even if it's getting a little dirty and I should find a place for it, but that's not going to happen. And another thing going is the MJF situation. There's a lot of people with how people are taking with the MJF situation. They don't know what is and is not real. And I think he is the definition of keeping it kayfabe. You don't know what is and isn't real. You have AEW as a hardcore audience. Hardcore smart marks. Some of them anyways, not all. Some people are there just to enjoy it. But when I went to Fighter Fest, the people behind me were talking about MJF. People around me were talking about MJF. They want to see MJF. They wish they could hear a promo from him. They wish they could have, trashed their town of Savannah. It was interesting. And you also had discussions brought up, but they don't know what to believe in. They don't know if the MJF shoot was real. They don't know if it was fake. They don't know what to believe in. And it is phenomenal. That is probably the best way to keep kayfabe. And that shoot promo that he did in California, that was a phenomenal shoot promo. You don't get that kind of stuff anywhere else. Granted, WWE is getting a lot better now with Triple H more into creative control. Things have gotten so much better over there. You got Drew McIntyre mentioning the words wrestling, wrestlers. He doesn't care about superstars and whatnot. That is phenomenal. So we got so many things changing in the wrestling world. But back to MJF. Here's my take. And, you know, everyone's wrong until proven so. We don't know. Only MJF knows. Only he knows what's up. Only he knows what's going to happen. Maybe a couple other people do. Maybe a couple people don't. But, wow, it is fascinating to think. So, in my mind, I don't think MJF would burn bridges with a company such as AEW. Because, let's say, he had totally shot that promo from heart. He's meant every word he said. He left AEW. He goes to WWE. What happens if he goes to WWE and he gets mistreated? What happens if he does not like that company? What happens if he goes to somewhere else? It doesn't have to be WWE. He could go anywhere else. What happens if he doesn't like that area and then he needs to find somewhere else to work? He can't start his own promotion. And it's not like he's going to want to work small little indie dates. I mean, you might have to if you get to that point. But if you want to work the big time, you want to work the big leagues, then, in my mind, why would you burn bridges with a company like AEW that has given you a platform the past 3 years and had turned you into the major star that you are today? Because before AEW started, hardly anyone knew who MJF was unless you watched MLW. And if you watched that, you sort of got an understanding of who he was as a character. And he was pretty good. He was pretty good in MLW, but it's not like people watch MLW. Not as much anyways. It's not like it gets the biggest mainstream media attention. So it's stuff like that. And so I don't think MJF would burn bridges with a company like AEW if he really shot that promo from heart, if things are real, if things are happening the way they are. Why would you do that? You would have to think it through, because if you need a fallback plan. You leave one company for another, that company doesn't work, why would you burn bridges? Because at that point, when you leave WWE, you can't go back to AEW because you just burnt the bridges. You know what I'm saying? Stuff like that is what comes to mind. And I don't think anyone has really thought of that. Like, because would he really go to somewhere like New Japan? Maybe. But that would probably be like the third biggest platform. If you go to AAA, I don't know. I don't see as much attention from AAA. Yes, it's a big platform, but maybe only down in Mexico, some parts in USA, maybe some parts around the world. But I'm not seeing too much mainstream media on AAA, other than what AEW has presented here on television with AAA and FTR winning the AAA championships and what they've done over there. And I think it's a smart business move for what Tony Khan has done, just putting people all over the place, letting them do their thing. It's great for everyone, great for wrestling, and great for WWE. And I'm not going to lie, I have not watched WWE in so long, but I have been to a couple of their events the past couple of times. One in SmackDown 2021 and once recently on Raw earlier this year. I forgot what day it was. It was when things were starting to warm up around here. It was all right. Both shows seemed like matches were really quick paced. Promos were quick. Everything was fast, which was interesting. And 3 hours just sometimes feels a little too long for Raw. And there's been discussions on the internet like, what if Raw goes back to 2 hours? I think that would be fantastic. Raw being in 2 hours is peak prime Raw back in the day. That was when you can jam as much as you needed to be shown on TV. That way you can produce better production. So when it converted to 3 hours, at first it was a great idea because Raw was doing so great. It had all the great stars. It was doing well at the time. And then as the years went by, and I say late 2018, 2019, that's when the show was just starting to be bland. That's when nothing was coming out. COVID hit. So... And I was interested. When COVID did hit. I was interested to see what they would do in regards to that. I didn't enjoy the Thunderdome idea as much. I didn't really enjoy seeing all sorts of screen videos of like people and their faces and close up and everything. Some of them laggier than others, and just some ugly views, and it just wasn't my taste. Oh well, but. That's why we have options in the wrestling world. This is why we accept things the way they are. If you like hardcore stuff, you go to GCW until a man touches himself. Then sometimes that becomes a problem. But AEW, I've been a fan ever since day one, and they've changed a lot though. And oh boy, I was watching a documentary on Netflix. I think. It was about there's a show on Netflix about toys, and there was a episode where they were talking about wrestling figures, and Cody Rhodes was on there, and he was talking about how if you get too much stars and you keep spending money on stars and overpacking your product with stars more and more and more, you're gonna get problems. You're going to have a lot of people who wants power, or you're going to have a lot of debates. You're going to have a lot of money being spent on these guys, and you're going to essentially self-destruct because you're not creating new stars. You're buying previous stars, and you keep adding, and you keep adding, and you keep adding. And I find this incredibly interesting how Cody Rhodes had mentioned that, and he was in AEW at the time. And when you add an ad, you kind of self-destruct your product. And I feel like this is essentially what AEW is doing, because as of late, they've been debuting a lot of new stars over and over and over, and they've been adding and adding and adding, and it feels like the talent in 2019 is completely different to how it is in 2022. And I think that's what made AEW so special in 2019, was that you had a lot of fresh talent on national TV making a name for themselves. Granted, we do have some of that talent in 2022, still a big deal. You got Sammy Guevara, you got Darby Allin, you got all sorts of people, Jungle Boy, and it's great. And the bigger stars are being utilized with that young talent, of course. But we have a lot of talent from 2019 that I just feel like hasn't been used properly, because you got people like Angelico, who is phenomenal. And it sucks that his tag team partner, Jack Evans, split from the company, the team TH2, because they are phenomenal if you let them be phenomenal. And I was just watching a couple of matches of 2019 when AEW was doing pay-per-views against random teams like Private Party. And it was wrestling like that was like, oh, wow. At first, the crowd was a little silent, and then the crowd was really cheering at the end. Like, oh, that was phenomenal. And, you know, you got names like Joey Janela, which a lot of people liked. I liked him. And you thought he would be pushed. You thought he would be pushed to the max because he had wrestled against big names and doing fantastic matches in the early days of AEW when it had pay-per-views, when it was just a wrestling show that turned into Dynamite. He was doing fantastic, and then just somehow, for whatever reason, over the years, he's not been doing so fantastic. He's been having less TV time. It is stuff like that that boggles my mind, because it sucks to see when you're at a show in 2019, you see all these new faces, and you're really impressed with what they're doing, but then you don't see some of these faces in 2022, but you see big stars, but it's like, you also wanted to see these new faces. You also remember the stuff that they do. I'm not saying this is the worst thing to come to life in AEW. Of course, AEW is getting better and better. I'm extremely hyped now that CM Punk is back and going against Jon Moxley, so we can crown a new champion. And my take on that, everyone loves CM Punk and Jon Moxley. Well, except for those who are homophobic and watch GCW and then suddenly hates Jon Moxley. Well, those are also the same haters that hated Jon Moxley when he left WWE, but that's a whole different conversation. Anyways, you have two stars, and Jon Moxley, of course, is younger than CM Punk, and I feel like it is still Jon Moxley's time. He has been doing nothing but busting himself on AEW. He could do a little less blading. He could do a little less bleeding, if you ask me. This man basically bleeds after a couple of punches. And Jon Moxley, please stop doing that, because you're just going to end up looking like a man who went through barbed wires. Your forehead is not going to look pretty when you're older. I don't know if he cares about that or not, but like, you don't have to bleed every match. I understand it may have added effect, but not needed. God. But anyways, I feel like the Summer of Punk was supposed to be a thing, but then he got injured. He comes back freshly just last week or whatever, and now CM Punk and Jon Moxley. And there is stages to this feud that can go high. There is stages where you could go back to 2008, when CM Punk and Jeff Hardy were doing their thing, when they were doing their promos. It was drug-free life versus an alcoholic life. Ooh, boy, that feud could be relit with Jon Moxley. CM Punk could cut hard-hitting promos to Jon Moxley about the cigarettes he smokes, about the drinking, about the rehab, about everything that he has done. Imagine that. I think that would be phenomenal. But you can't make promos like that unless you're a heel, because I don't think everyone's going to agree with CM Punk if he just cut out a random promo like that. And of course, everyone loves Jon Moxley. Everyone loves the stuff he's been doing. It sucked when he went to rehab, but hey, that man went to rehab to fix himself. And I understand, we all understood, and he came back looking greater than ever. And he had a great pop. He is a fantastic wrestler, and everyone loved it. And he is a great interim AEW World Champion, and he's been hitting banger matches after banger matches. He's been wrestling almost everyone on the card. He has been a phenomenal talent, and he's been phenomenal in GCW. No matter where he goes, whether it be New Japan, whether it be Defy, he has been fan-frickin-tastic no matter what he does. Props to him. I actually have his book, the box whatever book, and I read that earlier this year in April. Fantastic book. It feels like you're just reading his mind. Like, he really just spewed his mind on that book. But the chapters and whatnot are a little unorganized, because there'd be like chapter 1 or whatever, he'll be talking about 2018, then he'll be talking about 2007, then he'll be talking about 2015. Like, his story is a little bit scrambled throughout the book, but it's easy to piece it together. It's not that complicated. It's not that hard. It's like, oh, you did this. Oh, you did that. Oh, you did this. Oh, you did that. So it's not that complicated to read his book. His book is great. Fantastic. I recommend it to anyone who hasn't read it. I have been reading Justin Incredible's book as well. He recently made a book, and I originally pre-ordered it. And when you pre-ordered it, you were supposed to receive an Arlo mask. I didn't get it, but I did get a signed Justin Incredible book. That is just incredible for you. I learned what kind of person he is after that. But his book is pretty good. I'm so far halfway reading that book. And he tells you about him being part of the Clique. Yes, he was a member of the Clique. And he tells you all of his stories about it. And that hug that they've done on Madison Square Garden, where it was Shawn Michaels, Triple H, Diesel, and Razor. They all hugged it out in the middle of the ring. Before that hug, Razor had went up to Justin Incredible, and it's like, you're part of us. You should join us in that ring and hug with us. But he didn't do it because Justin, he understood the type of consequences that would follow after. But imagine if someone like Justin Incredible was a part of that little hug. Imagine what kind of career he would have had afterwards. Because, yeah, he may have been punished, but WWE likes to go back to that video when they're talking about the Clique, when they're talking about DX or NWO. They like to go back to that time a lot. So imagine if someone like Justin Incredible was actually part of that. Oh, that would be fascinating, wouldn't it? It'd be interesting because maybe he wouldn't have a run in ECW. Maybe he would have stayed in WWE. I don't know. It's interesting. But at the same time, you can understand why he didn't go out because he is a newer, fresher talent over there. Anything can happen to him. He has more chance of getting hurt than Triple H at that time. And Triple H, yes, he did get a consequence punishment. But, what, a year after? 97? DX? Like, dude went from bottom of the barrel to up high on top of the rating. So, it's interesting how much a year can make a difference. And it's interesting that kind of stuff that can happen that will result into different things, and I can understand the fear of it. But boy, it's stuff like that that makes me wonder, what if? Just like how Marvel has a what if series on their Disney Plus whatever, what if in wrestling? Boy, wouldn't that have been phenomenal. I'm on that part of the book right now, if you haven't read the book, which is most likely. But anyways, back to Jon Moxley and CM Punk. I've been changing a lot of conversations throughout this podcast, but when you're talking nonstop, you kind of have to somehow create a conversation. But if you don't have a partner, you kind of have to make a conversation with yourself, and it's kind of sad. Anyways, Jon Moxley, CM Punk, all out. I wouldn't mind if Jon Moxley won this one. I used to be a huge CM Punk fan. Even before his pipe bomb promo, when he had the long hair, doing the feud with, as I mentioned earlier, Jeff Hardy, I always thought this man was gold. I always liked his, style, his cutting edge style, straight edge. I liked his idea, and of course, everything about him was different from all the wrestlers at the time, and he felt more real. And just like the MJF promo, he makes you believe. You gotta make him believe. CM Punk was one of those guys that makes you feel like he believes. That's a main part of this. So, boy, that time was a different time, and I really enjoyed it as a fan. Even though I didn't watch WWE as much, I would catch up with it on YouTube. People would post full clips of stuff on YouTube all the time, and if not there, anywhere else on the internet, you could easily find wrestling content. And I would just relive watching those over and over. Phenomenal. And of course, I would eventually watch his older stuff in Ring of Honor or TNA. I would definitely watch a whole lot of different things. Like, man, this guy is so cool. But now, over the years, I've become a fan of Jon Moxley. I've become a huge fan of who he is, what he is, how he does it. And this whole feud has a lot of potential to be something greater than it already is. No, I'm recording this on Tuesday. I'm going to upload this on Thursday. So, unfortunately, I'm going to skip out on AEW Dynamite. You guys won't hear my take until the next episode for that one. My recording times are going to be so random because whenever I'm making this podcast, It's going to be on random times, and I'm going to upload it every Thursday in the morning if I can, because this is Cold Brew Wrestling, and I plan on uploading it in the morning. And maybe this podcast will go out somewhere. Maybe I can get someone to help co-host this thing. Maybe I can go farther. Who knows? I'm just testing the waters. I'm tapping it. I'm splashing it. I'm just seeing where this all goes. I plan on making a logo. I plan on uploading this podcast as much as I can on different platforms, just so I can get different media outlets, of course, like any other human doing a podcast would. But yeah, Jon Moxley, CM Punk. I want Moxley to win. Not saying that I hate CM Punk or anything. I love Punk, and I was so happy to see him wrestle in AEW Revolution. I went to that pay-per-view as well earlier this year in Orlando. That event was huge, and the people around me were fantastic. And there was even a spot where when Sting was coming up with Matt Hardy onto the stairs to do that table dive, I was one of the first people that he went up towards in that area. It was fantastic. Anyways, podcast. This is my first episode of the Cold Brew Podcast. If you had liked this podcast, please rate, like, subscribe, do whatever you do, whether it be on YouTube or whatever other media outlet this thing does go on to. I hope I have enjoyed your previous 48 plus minutes onto this thing. I will continue on planning on making more. We'll talk about different subjects. I promise to make a better show, because the first episodes is always an awkward episode. This is more of an introduction and my opinions on some things. Not all things, but some things. Get to know me a little bit more. I'm going to try to create something where if anyone is listening to, which I hardly doubt, if anyone's listening, I'm going to either create an email for fans to mail, or I'm thinking about a hashtag on Twitter or something. I'm not too sure. We'll think of something as we go along the way. You can find me at the channel Sprite Pix, Pix, YouTube. I upload a lot there. I also upload a lot on Spritey, D-A, Sprite Y at the end. That is where I'm starting a new channel, and this is where all these podcasts will be on. And I have a Twitter. You can follow me at SpritePix. So, again, if you like this podcast, do whatever you need to do. I will see you guys next week. But for now, go to bed.